Abortion, pro-life, pro-choice. Did these terms invoke any feelings in you? Did they give you a certain kind of emotional reaction? Well, chances are probably yes, because in our climate today, they definitely invoke some responses. However, what's the Christian approach to some of these controversial subjects? Now, today we're not going to solve the debate and tell you what's right and what's wrong and what we should do as policies, but we are going to engage in kind of a meta conversation around these things. What is a healthier way to approach this entire debate, this entire controversy? Today on the show is Angela Weszely, the founder and CEO of ProGrace, an organization helping Christians transcend the partisan divide around abortion by grounding the conversation in the values and the grace of Jesus. With over 2 decades of experience guiding churches and nonprofits, Angela has witnessed the damage of political frameworks that force Christians to choose between compassion for women and care for children. In her new book, Becoming ProGrace, she invites the church to reimagine its approach, not by choosing sides, but by choosing grace. I'm Jake Doberenz, and this is Christianity Without Compromise, a podcast for Christians who love Jesus but are tired of culture war faith. Now, let's get to rebuilding a faith that actually looks like Jesus. Angela Weszely, thank you for being on Christianity Without Compromise. Excited
So
to
glad
talk
to be
to
here,
you.
Jake. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, of course. I gotta say, this show's been kicking for like over a year and a half now, and we haven't touched abortion at all with a 10-foot
Yeah,
pole. So we'll get to dive into that fun
yeah,
subject for sure. But I really like your take on it. I don't want to spoil too much things. Although I spoiled it a little bit in the intro, I'm excited to talk to you today. That's what I wanted to
great.
make clear. I'm
Well, and
excited. Great.
thank you. And I'm glad you do want to talk about it. I recognize it's becoming more and more difficult for Christians to talk about. So, and I want to assure everyone listening, this is a very peaceful, non-political way to talk about it. And we have to say that first, right? Because all of us get that nervous, tense feeling, right? When we hear
Yeah.
the word abortion, and Christian sometimes in the same sentence. So,
Oh, 100%. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Yeah, I have a decently diverse audience.
okay,
Although many of my audience are throwing off. They don't like the conservative. They don't like the progressive labels because it just doesn't
right,
fit.
right.
And we'll get into that, of course.
Yeah.
And so I think this is a good conversation, right, for that weird intersection that we all find ourselves in. But I guarantee you, people have strong opinions about this. So,
Right. Which is great. Which is great. I mean, it's
hey,
important. It's
that's
important
right.
to hold
It is
convictions on it.
important. Yeah. So let's time travel. Let's start out. Let's take us back, Angela, to your 20-year high school reunion. At this time, you were executive director of a pregnancy resource nonprofit.
hmm
Now, when you told people at this reunion about your job, um, what were their reactions?
That's a great question. And I think it's important to back it up and say I'd really only been in this job for about 5 months. So I was new and I already knew I was getting strange reactions from people in my community. So I actually spent time practicing, Jake, an elevator speech. I Googled how to do it. I was like,
Hey,
this
yeah.
one's going to kill it, right? It's non-political, it's common ground. So I should tell everyone what I said. Now, this is, I hate to say how many, over a decade ago, actually, that this happened. My language is much different now. But at the time I said, everyone asks you, what do you do? So I was ready. I said, I lead a Christian pregnancy organization, might have even said nonprofit. We help support women who are facing unintended pregnancies, and we want to see the number of abortions greatly reduced. Now, that was my common ground elevator speech, which I would never use now. And people just froze, Jake. It was like, it's like from a movie, right? People just freeze and almost take a step back from me, some of them, and the conversation just died right there. And then they would pick it up with a different topic, and I would be left thinking, what happened? What did I just say? Now, an introvert might have left the room and processed that and come back with a different elevator speech. I'm very extroverted, so I kept saying it. I cringe to think about this, but I kept using that same line. And it really wasn't until the next day that I had a chance to think about, these are classmates who I get along with. They like me. We were having a great conversation before this elevator speech. What happened in that moment when I said that? And what does that say about their experience with Christians, whether it's personal experience or even what they see in the media? I wasn't defensive about it. I more was like, why would they have this reaction? What have we possibly done as Christians that would cause someone to have that type of reaction? And that was really what my whole first couple years at the pregnancy organization was like, that feeling of upheaval of, what did I just say? I just completely shut down a conversation, and I don't know why.
Yeah, no, and it's good that you reflected on that and learned from it and changed and all of that. But yeah, that is one of those conversations that people have
Yes.
strong feelings about, especially when you throw in the religious angle there. You know, I grew up in Oregon. I grew up in a pretty progressive area. Um, there was, a lot of language about this in the zeitgeist, and not all of it really positive one way or the other. And so, yeah, people bring baggage to this,
Right.
and that's why they tell you, "Oh, my mom's calling," and run away from
Right.
conversations or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So let's talk about these two terms that we use a lot. We got pro-choice, we have pro-life. Um, you write in your book and you advocate in your organization that these are like legal and political categories. They don't really fully express a Christian response to abortion. So, what's the failure of these terms, and why do you like the term pro-grace?
Yeah. Great question. And I'll start by saying I loved what you said, that your audience is tired of labels because the labels don't accurately fit
Yeah,
our faith,
they don't.
and so that's the first thing is God, in his immense love and care for humanity, far transcends either label, right? So I think it's great that Christians are uncomfortable with these labels because it's showing us there's a disconnect, there's something off, because they weren't created for spiritual or theological purposes. And though some people use those words to describe maybe a theological view or an ethical view, it's important to know they really originated in the political sphere. They're about a certain type of legislation. So when political leaders want to galvanize their base, how do they speak? Do they speak in common ground, respectful language, or do they galvanize the troops, right, by being aggressive or by using language that paints the other side in a negative picture? And so with these terms, we feel forced to choose, right? Pro-life, I will prioritize the needs of the child. Pro-choice, I will prioritize the needs of the woman. And right there, we have our first disconnect because God says, wait, the Imago Dei is in every person. As Christians, we're called to treat everyone with equal value and equal dignity. So right off the bat, the terms don't get it that. And then there's a whole host of other reasons which have to do with the stereotypes. So someone can say, let's say a Christian says, I'm pro-life. Well, what is someone going to hear? They might hear that that person supports incarceration of women who choose abortion, right? Because there are some pro-life people abolitionists, who are for
Mhm.
that. So by using that term, we open up the possibility for someone to think we are the extreme. Same if a Christian says they're pro-choice, the listener might think, oh, you're okay with abortion for any reason up to 40 weeks. And most Christians I know don't fall in either of those extreme legislative camps either. So the words aren't theologically helpful because they can't capture God's heart for the woman and the child. And they're also not politically helpful if we have any type of nuance on where we fall on that legislative spectrum. So you start hearing Christians say things like, I'm personally pro-life, but I think abortion should be legal, up to 12 weeks. That's a very confusing position, and it just shuts down conversation, like at my reunion. So I advocate for leading with our theological view, right? So pro-grace really rests on two theological tenets, principles, three actually. The first is equal value, equal dignity. So right away I can say I think God is, cares for all people equally. Grace is the second one, and this is modeled after Jesus, and his interactions with people were just so filled with grace, much more than we communicate in what we do. So going back to that, and then this idea that we are Christians first before we are affiliated with any party. That's really
Absolutely.
the third rallying cry, is let's have language. This is what ProGrace does, gives us language and a paradigm to speak about this from the lens of our faith rather than a political party. So, and what we like to say is, when it's true, is we're just rooting this in historical Christianity. ProGrace is nothing new. That word is new. But what this is based on is historical Christianity that existed far earlier than these political terms, and just really trying to lay them down and get back to what is the heart of God and how can we unite as Christians around some shared core values that Christians have held for centuries.
Yeah, I love it. I don't know. I guess one of my feelings is, why didn't I think of this? Like why? Yeah, it's that failure of language, I guess, because you're in this camp or that camp, and yeah, like I haven't felt at home, but
Yes.
there was never language for it, and so you gave us a term, and I like it, and you named a
Great.
whole organization after it, and
Right.
Starting the conversation by omitting, like I said, like you brought up my audience here, the labels don't fit.
They don't.
This party or that, we're not, nobody's a fan, at least 100% of it, and and what you said, yeah, like we're talking theological concerns that were here before modern America, will be here
Right.
after America, like
Yes. Yes.
we're talking about deeper core things, and that
Right.
is important and beautiful.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
let's dive into more of being pro-grace, I guess,
Sure.
for lack of a better term. One of the things I liked in your intro to your book, you talked about going through the archives and materials of your organization, and you just kind of realized nobody thought to think about why. Why are people having abortions? Why would somebody do that? What's the reason behind this? You mentioned how some women were feeling like they were walking wombs, kind of thing, even when they were in these Christian resource centers that were supposed to be all about grace and things of that nature. All that to say, how do we go about considering the mother in all of this? From a abortion, from a not fan of abortion position, how do we consider the mother and not just the goal of got to get that baby out after 9 months or whatnot?
Right. Yeah, that's great. Okay, can we have a real-time conversation about
100%.
language?
Yeah.
So I
Yes.
think and it's not you. This is this is the failure of, now we're talking about the pro-life approach, and I'm happy to talk later about Christians adopting just a pro-choice approach without nuancing it. But this is the problem on the pro-life side, and that is the language has not been thought through in light of God's dignifying of each human. The language has been thought through in a legislative goal, right? So right there, two words. How do we consider was my first word, and then mother was the second word. So
Got it. Okay.
again, this is, everybody does it, but this is just a great real-time example of, we're not called, we don't use the word mother because that's an identifier for women. That means, again, it signifies, we don't intend this, but it can signify to women, all we care about is them in relationship
Okay.
to their child. And for women, this is
Sure.
huge historically. We are oftentimes characterized by our relationship to other people. We're a sister, we're this. And God says we matter as women. And he entrusted us with this key part in reproduction, and there needs to be honor and respect there. So it's more of like, how do we elevate the conversation to equally value the woman would be even and even just that phraseology. And it'd be great for your listeners just to think, how does that feel when I say that? That's a different framing. How do we equally elevate the woman in the conversation? And this is where the sides fall apart. This is why a lot of Christians now will identify as pro-choice, because they find the pro-life rhetoric to
Right.
be anti-woman.
Right. Right.
So this is where we bring Christians together and say, regardless of where your political affiliation lies, we are called to think about how to elevate the woman. And so that does start with, I would say, even looking at our own language, and then saying, where does this come from? Where did I get my views on abortion? Did they mainly lead with the concern for the child or the concern for the woman? And how do I let God reform my thinking to value on them both equally? Because back to my example at the pregnancy organization, I was disturbed by things I was hearing and seeing. And this is only because I'm a recovering legalist myself. So I grew up very legalistically, afraid of God. He was going to leave me if I backslid and did too many wrong things in my childhood. And so I had my own grace awakening that completely reformed the way I interacted with God. That's why this, I think, jumped out at me when I took this position. I had already gone through that. And I was like, well, how would I feel if I was a woman hearing this? So that is the problem, is a lot of this language can sound very condemning to women and not entering into their story and what's actually happening. And so that's just the first place, is to think about, have we considered them both, and then start to dig in. What would it be like to be a woman who is experiencing an unintended pregnancy in our culture today? And I unpack a lot of this in the book, and you can decide which of these spokes you want to go to. But, with the inequalities that exist, even around carrying a child, pregnancy discrimination, how much are men involved? What's the shame picture look like for Christian communities? Do they heap shame on women, or are they treated as one of us because we all walk through times of struggle? There's a lot of different ways to start considering, where have we just not paid attention? And so I think that's the biggest thing, is to start paying attention and using curiosity and empathy to think about, like I said, that question, why, which is interesting. That question, why, was my first question because I was wanting to serve women. As I started asking why, I started seeing ways I had not dignified women and their experience. So it turned into a much bigger question, is what I'm saying, where we don't even pose that question a ton in ProGrace. It has turned into more, how am I doing as a Christian in how I view this? And that
Yeah.
is, I would say, a key distinguisher of ProGrace is, while the political debate focuses on changing and influencing others, and I would say we've adopted a lot of that at the pregnancy organization, that was what the goal was, to influence the women. But Jesus tells us that we're to look inside first, that it's who we are as people that allows him to flow and bring change. And so the first way to start considering the woman is to look at ourselves, interestingly enough, and just, where are our paradigms? Where do we want God to reshape us? That right there can just take the pressure out of these conversations, can allow Christians to come together, because we can all agree we've heard some things that aren't Christ-like. We probably believe some things that aren't Christ-like, and we can just very gently, with grace, ask ourselves these questions. Why do people think this about Christians? Have I participated in this? And that is a huge first step. People want to rush out to try and serve someone with this lived experience. And always at ProGrace, we're saying, no, let's come back. This is a space for us. Because, I was told, there was a reason I grew up with the view I did on abortion. It was what I was told, right? And we just need that space to process that for ourselves first.
Okay, great. I appreciate the engagement. I think language is super important, and we do need to
Yes.
get that right.
Yes.
How we talk about it. I was a communication minor in college, so I know
Hey.
just 16 hours, but still, I got enough to be dangerous. And it's like, yeah, this is really important. And so I appreciate you making those clarifications for us, talking about what's really matter, really centering us on the important things. I love how you brought up we turn all of these into like political objectives, or our goal is this, when it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. First thing is, are we in the right spot ourselves?
Yes.
We have to transform ourselves, and trying to change other people's mind, influence other people, not always the best use of our time. Not always really the goal.
Yeah, I mean,
So
that's a
that is
whole
important.
theological perspective on a study of the Gospels, and I
Yeah.
think it behooves us as Westerners. I have a great friend. I'll give a plug for the Center for Peace Building at Fuller Seminary. If you haven't spoken with Christy Vine, she's amazing. But she just talks about we're programmed as Americans from the first time we speak to influence people, but really, true conversation and communication involves how we listen and how we let others influence us. And so even just having that mindset shift is huge. I think Christians, we feel a lot of tension because we've been told we are responsible to believe a certain way or speak certain things on this issue. It's almost a litmus test of our faith. And I would say we are responsible to connect with Jesus and make sure that we are
Amen.
Christ-like. And that will flow out to all of these very important issues. Obviously, Jesus was very concerned with any issue that impacted humans, but he really did start with the posture of his followers, not influencing other people. So that's a huge, and that's actually how I was framed. It was going to a church that finally, for the first time, preached Jesus stories. I was like, whoa, I didn't realize he was this radical. My church always
Yeah.
told me what to do, the second half of all
Ye-
the epistles. But when you really dive into Jesus stories, that's that communication with the Father and that internal transformation. So we're not just making this up again. It really is rooted in Jesus
yeah.
stories, how he
Yeah.
operated.
Hey, and that's exactly what I want to do with the show, with the community around Christianity without compromise. This has got to be everybody. This has got to be top 5 episode of 2026, and we're barely in there. Like,
Yeah, right.
make this one really popular, because this is ultimately, setting aside the specific topic at hand, these core things. That's exactly what we need to go back to. They
Right.
apply to way more than just about abortion and pregnancy and things. That
Absolutely.
is that is the mission. We just keep getting off track. Shiny
Right.
objects. We keep getting
Right.
distracted. So,
Right.
oh boy, love it, love it, love it. Um, a lot of directions to go. I do want to poke at. I want to explore a little bit more. Some things you've said about how the church's uh, kind of inability to sort of honestly wrestle with things like sex and pregnancy and gender roles kind of spills over to some of the issues with this conversation. So maybe you can help us do some like internal housekeeping with the church, right? Take that away.
Really easy topic in 5 minutes, right?
Well,
Um,
yeah.
so when I started this work, which has been almost 20 years now, I really was not connecting abortion to gender issues in the church. I was just like, wow, I got enough to talk about abortion, right? Like, the longer I do this, right? Why add another divisive topic? But the longer I do this, the more I'm convinced we absolutely struggle with our response to abortion. A huge part is because we are not aligned with the heart of Christ toward gender equality and the way God views
Yeah.
humans of both genders. So I just want to say that I think, and I'm not saying it's intentional, but I am saying there have been Western thought that has leaked into the church. The historical Christian church, and even what you start to see in the Gospels with the arrival of Jesus, is unprecedented level of respect for women in a culture where that wasn't the case. And so if we are to embody him, we need to go back to that, and it's funny. I hear people say Jesus was a great liberator of women. It's like, well, we can't just say that. We actually have to say, what would that look like for that to be true. So there's 4 parts in my book, and the third part really is about these issues, and I put them in 3 different categories. One is motherhood and views we have on motherhood. The other is about objectification, the way we view sexuality between the genders. And then the third is this general idea of equality. And so being off in any of those areas will impact how we view abortion. So, for example, if we haven't considered the woman involved, could it be because of some of this wrong thinking about women? So, and an example is in a church where it's so pronounced to what they believe about abortion is so top of mind, or they will have women come up to the front and apologize, and be singled out, or all these different things. And then you find out that behind the scenes, a leader was abusing women. Okay. Those 2 things happening together. No, neither really is the heart of Christ. And if we can back up and deal with the one and see them as connected, then I think, if we can get to the place where we ask the question, what does it feel like to be a woman in the American church today? That's going to already transition into how we view abortion. But that's a question that's not always being asked. And I will say this, I am not talking about egalitarian versus complementarian theology. What I'm talking about is, again, core Christian values that sit above those theological distinctions and apply to all denominations, every Christian. We are called to be brothers and sisters. And my opinion is we just blow that off too often and don't think about it. It radically impacts the abortion issue. It radically impacts why we see young women leaving the church in higher numbers than ever before. And when you ask them why, they don't feel seen. They don't feel heard. I mean, it's all connected. So again, wherever we fall on any type of denominational spectrum with that, all of us need to ask the question, what does it feel like to be a woman in our church? What are we allowing people to talk about with their struggles? I mean, this is as much, it's hard as a woman to hear sometimes men talk about this. Like are there safe places where people actually can talk about, there's a frustration I found with men recently of feeling like their voices aren't being heard. We have to do that as well. Like this is about both genders coming together and saying, I've been hurt, or I'm nervous about this, and that's why grace is so important, and this equal value, equal dignity. If we can start to have that conversation, imagine what that would open up. So I don't know if that answers your question. There's a lot more to do with practicalities on those issues that we can talk about. But first, I like to talk about the heart issue. And are we committed to really evaluating ourselves? Are we acting like Jesus toward the other gender?
And we need to talk about the hard stuff first, and that's what I wanted you to address. You have a book, and you have an organization. You have resources you can point people to for some of the nitty-gritty details.
Absolutely.
And so that's really important. I do kind of want to throw in another question, though. We've mostly been, I've admittedly been assuming that my listener would probably more identify with the pro-life side of things. Maybe you could just speak real briefly to just a perspective on what we might call the pro-choice side of things. Somebody who's considering those, considering themselves a part of that side, if you will.
Yes.
Because I have some listeners that are more progressive, and they might say they might have some strong some strong feelings on when life begins, and say, I'm all for abortion. And so somebody that is more pro-choice, that is more accepting of that, what do you want to say to them regarding this pro-grace conversation? That's what I'm trying to say.
Great question. Yeah. So I'm just going to point out 2 words again. One is celebrative, and all for abortion.
Yes.
So I would say, and your listeners can comment to me and let me know. I mean, I've never talked to a Christian who is celebrative or all for abortion. So I think this is part of the breakdown of the language. When I said, if we just use those words, we assume people hit the far spectrum of their political affiliation when they could be just barely over the line. So this is what I like to say. Thoughtful Christians who are wrestling with how Jesus interacted in the world, regardless of whether they tip to pro-life or pro-choice, we have much more in common with each other than either the extremes of our political parties. And this is why I'm asking Christians to not use those words with each other. I mean, if you want to say how you vote, that's a different conversation. But to have the conversation and start with our common Christian theological rooting is much more productive. So even when you say a pro-choice Christian, there's so many nuances to that I want to respect and honor, just as our pro-life listeners have nuances, right? The pro-choice, if we're following Jesus, we're going to be disturbed with some things in our political party, right? And so
Amen.
That's what I encourage Christians on both sides to do. Live with that disturbance that you have when you hear someone of your own political side talk. Be uncomfortable with how they are leaving out one person in this equation, and it happens on both sides. And so I'm saying the same things to Christians, whether we're pro-life or pro-choice. I know I did say, I'll mention them. I happen to come up through a pro-life background, so I've seen a lot more and I have a lot more experience. But I believe it's the same issues on the side of Christians who tip pro-choice. Don't stop wrestling. None of us should stop wrestling with the laws, how we want to see this nuanced. We don't have to give in to how our party frames this. And so that's the thing, is that we can come together. Here's an example as Christians and say, God creates all life, right? I mean, isn't that God creates all life? In fact, the way he does it is intertwining a woman and a child during pregnancy, which is a mystery that tells us a lot about our interdependence as humans. I mean, actually, if you start to think about it, why did God do it that way? There's we could go off on a whole discussion of it, but it's a picture of God's design that we can't try to help one person and bypass the other. And this is just as true, whatever side we fall on. As Christians, if we can come together and say we want to be equally committed to both, that is going to allow us to work together, regardless of when we believe life starts. So that is the thing I can see Christians will disagree on. Does life start at conception? Does life, but we can still agree God creates all life, and we've got two people involved, whatever point in the pregnancy. I mean, I think there's so much room for agreement, and we've camped out on that place of disagreement. But if we can come together as valuing the Imago Dei, and that is different wrestling for pro-choice Christians than pro-life Christians, potentially. Interestingly enough, we might actually be really similar theologically, just using different terms. I do want to say that.
9 times out of 10. Totally.
Yeah,
sure.
Right. But really wrestling as well. Okay, if there are two people, is my approach, if I say I'm pro-choice, am I leaving out the child and how I think God is involved in the child? Just like we would say to pro-life, am I leaving out the woman? So this is to all of us. And I think that's why I even hesitate to this group, to that group. I think we are, a lot of us, in this radical and messy middle, which is right where God wants us. And so both sides need to wrestle, and then we'll have that posture of curiosity. And also, last thing, let's not assume the worst of each other. If we've heard Christians use these terms, let's keep in mind they are most likely not the far extreme of their party. Whatever term we've heard friends or family use to start a different conversation, when you lay those terms down, we might find out we are 99% agreeing. So that goes to people on both sides.
Love it so much. It's very helpful. I am not an expert on everything, and I make wrong word choices on podcasts.
So and you're such a good sport. You're such a good sport. I can tell you're going to be a good sport. We all do this. You know how I learned this is by saying all the wrong things.
Oh, there you go.
But it's just really helpful, I thought, for our listeners just to say, I did feel something when that word was said, and this word does feel different. So thank you for being a good sport with that.
Right. Like I said, fan of words, just don't always know the right ones to say.
Yep.
Well, I want to give you one last question before we roll into plugs, and of course our final question every guest gets. You've touched on this already in many points, but I want to imagine we have a hypothetical person. This is not me, this is a hypothetical person here who's like, all that sounds nice, Angela, but there's too much at stake. Whatever position there is, it could be the babies are being murdered, or the women's bodily autonomy is not being respected. Like whatever is being said, there's somebody probably listening to this that says, I like it, but like there's no time for grace, for listening. There's a problem. We got to act. We got to do X, Y, Z, whatever it takes. With somebody with those kind of emotions boiling up about this, how would you respond?
Yeah, no, that's great. I think there is a lot at stake, and that is why it will never work to separate it out, just like you said, right? Both things that you said, Christians need to be concerned about. That's actually why I'm so passionate. I think there's a lot at stake. So ProGrace does not diminish any of our ethical considerations or our passion for justice, because God is more passionate about justice than any of us. Our problem has been in who we seek the justice for, how we seek it, why we think this is a problem. That's where we need God to come and expand. So I'm not asking either side to care about that person any less that you said. It's more of an expansion of how does God feel about everyone involved? And that starts to lead us down paths of what is happening. That's when you get to the why. There's actual very destructive things in our culture that are happening that don't respect parenthood, that don't respect people who are struggling to raise a child. That's actually the enemy, not each other. So if we say there's so much at stake, we really need to reevaluate how we go after that. So I'm not saying there's not a lot at stake. I'm saying we're doing it in an ineffective and unchristlike way. And I believe if we do it in a more Christ-like way, that's when God can come in and start working miracles. I mean, I have incredible vision that the church would be the safest place to have this conversation, that no person would feel alone, that when we get in there and we're communities, for a lot of people, they actually don't want to feel forced into this decision, but it's a reality because of all these other things happening. If we act like Jesus and are welcoming, what will God do? But again, we are trying to do it ourselves. That's the problem. It's about what is our role. Our role is to be more like Jesus, so we can open up this conversation, so people can actually approach us. I would say to both sides, the stats are like 7% of all women talk to anybody at a church before making this decision. Same with men. Men, it's like 5%. We're just not relevant because we're not safe. So if we really believe so much is at stake, let's reform ourselves first and then see what God does, because I think he'll do amazing things.
Amen. Let's reform ourselves first, and then God's going to do some cool, amazing things. Love that so much. That is good. Whoa, this episode's been really good. I loved it. I truly do. This has been a really great conversation. I do want to give you some chance to talk about your book, which comes out today when this episode releases.
Yes.
Even if you're listening to it later, it's out. It's out now.
Right.
So tell us where to find ProGrace. Where else do you want to point people to?
Yeah, so you can go on Amazon is the easiest. It's also available through Barnes & Noble and InterVarsity Press, which is our publisher. It's also on the ProGrace website, which is just prograce.org. And what I say about the book is it really is a lot of my story and saying what I got wrong. And so I did that on purpose. This is a we type of book. We just taking time to explore. It's not threatening. It's a very, well, you read part of it. I'm very transparent with what happens with me.
It. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just think we need to, so I wanted people to feel grace and feel safe, even accessing the book. So that was my heart in doing that. And if this has been helpful, everything we touched on, Jake, I go into further detail in the book. So if people want more, it's there.
Right. This whets their appetite here in the podcast. That's what I like to do. I love to promote good books. And this is a good book. So I have the privilege of getting a sneak peek at a lot of books being a podcaster. This is definitely one I'm like most excited for this year. I don't know what comes out necessarily in the latter half of the year, but we'll see what happens. But right now, this is a top one for sure. This is one people need to check out. So,
great,
Angela, thank you. I do have that final question for you. I'm really excited to hear what you're going to say about this. So here, I'm going to read it exactly. Here's the question that every guest gets at the end of the episode. So, as we close, leave the audience with just one practical action they can do this week to live out their faith fully for Jesus.
So I would say ask someone that you're close to, but maybe doesn't agree with you on this issue. What is their opinion on how Christians have engaged in the abortion issue? Just say, I heard a podcast. I'm not going to share what I believe. I just want to hear you and really have a curious posture and listen to what someone's experience has been with Christians. That is the way I believe we start on this reformation journey with God, is by hearing not what we intend, because none of us intend this, but what if we unintentionally communicated in our culture and our communities? That, to me, that was my first step. I got thrown into doing it, but it's been incredibly valuable just to ask that question and then let God work in our hearts based on what we hear.
Oh man, I love it. That'd be very interesting. I'm excited to try that out myself. I like to talk a little bit and give my opinions, but I will try to hold that back and then let somebody else speak.
We can talk again about it. If you want to share your opinions, we can come on again and process how it was for you. But it is really important that we don't cut people off, because they will just clam up very quickly. So I'm the same way, Jake. I had to learn just to zip my mouth and listen.
Yeah, it's a daily issue, specifically in my marriage sometimes. To say like, sorry, honey, I had to get that thought out, but I don't need to. Anyway, Angela, Weszely, it's been so great having you on today. We're really appreciative of that. I end the episode with giving a challenge of who to share this episode with. We want people to hear this. I've already said, I want this one to be a top 5 episode this year in 2026. Let's make it happen, guys. I don't exactly know what all the other episodes are going to look like, but we got to some really foundational issues that I myself am super excited about. So that's why I like it so much. And it's a good topic. We got to talk about it. So when it comes to sharing this episode, think about anybody that has an opinion, has a feeling when you say abortion, pro-life, pro-choice, whatever. That runs the gambit of a lot of different people. So share with anybody and everybody. Let's change the conversation. Guys, let's change the conversation about these issues when it comes to the Christian response, when it comes to the church. Because I like that vision that Angela has. Let's make the church be that safe space where people do come to. I want to see that. I'm excited about that. So,
amen.
Boy, awesome episode. Thank you so much for being on. It's been an absolute blast.
Thank you for the conversation. It's been great. Thanks, Jake.
This episode of Christianity Without Compromise was hosted by me, Jake Doberenz, and produced by Theophany Media, my podcast production company. If this conversation served you, please rate and review the show and share it with a friend and help others find it. You can also subscribe at jakedoberenz.substack.com to get email updates with new episodes every Tuesday and my often humorous theological reflections on Fridays. And as always, don't just listen, live it. Live out that Christianity without compromise. Thanks for listening.